Hey everybody, insight number 3. We're in Matthew 12, we're in Matthew 12, 1 to 13. I've just been talking about Christ's invitation to lighten our heavy by taking his yoke. So if you want to know about that, that's insight number 2, go check that out. And if you want to know why that teaching came about, then check out insight number 1. There you go. So we're in insight number 3, and this is like a Sabbath by rule versus Sabbath by relationship. So let's have a look at what happens here. So Jesus in verse 1 is on the Sabbath day, he's going through the corn, and him and his disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck some corn and eat it. Right, like you would on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees saw it though and was like, oh, you can't do that on the Sabbath day, that's work, because you plucked the corn. And Christ says unto them, this is in verse 3, did you not read what David did when he was hungry? Like, you should know this, it's okay. And then, because David entered into the house with the shewbread when he was hungry and ate it. And it was only for the priests. So, and they were like, oh my gosh, you can't do that. And he's like, yeah, I can. And then he says, oh, you've not read the law that on the Sabbath days the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless. It's like, this is not what the priests do that make them entitled to eat the bread. Like, they're not any better. It's just, So if you've known what this meaneth, you wouldn't find this. The Son of Man is the Lord, even on the Sabbath day. So he's saying, I am Christ, especially on the Sabbath day. Like, not just other days of the week. I don't take a day of rest here. I take rest, and I encourage you to rest, but in resting, it's still like activities, It's not literally lying there doing nothing. So he's departed and he goes and heals someone on the Sabbath day. Now when he heals the man with the withered hand, this is in verse 10, oh my gosh, are they in uproar about it? Like, oh, this breaks so many rules. You're helping somebody on the Sabbath day. This is definitely work. This is not appropriate. This is not allowed. And the Pharisees and the scribes were just up in arms about it. But he says to them in verse 11, and he said unto them, what man shall there be among you that shall have one sheep, and if it fall into a pit on the Sabbath day, will he not lay hold on it and lift it out? Because that's what we do. Would you leave the sheep there till the next day and say, oh, sorry, it's a Sabbath, I can't help you? That animal doesn't understand that. It just knows it's in distress. Are you that cruel? No. He says, how much better then is a man than a sheep? Wherefore it is lawful to do well on the Sabbath days. And so he healed the man. It is lawful to do well on the Sabbath day. Go about doing good. So Sabbath guidelines exist so that the Sabbath can reach its intent, but don't get stuck in the rules there again, because the Sabbath is soul food. So, Sabbath by rule versus Sabbath by relationship. So, doing things on the Sabbath that the Pharisees and scribes had rules against brought about this teaching from Christ. So, Jesus teaches here by word and deed that doing good on the Sabbath is a priority over perceived rules. So, he gives the example of David eating the shewbread. It meant only for the priests. It was then sort of an indication of like, this is like a sacrament that will happen, which is yet, of course, to be instituted. But he's saying that in this example that he gives of David was like that this sacrament isn't just for the priest. This is for everybody. The sacrament that Jesus is going to institute is for everyone. Even if you're not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or if you're not a member of a church, it is still an invitation for you to come and partake of that sacrament if you want to do so. It might have a different meaning to you if you're not quite a believer in Christ, but still the invitation is there for you. If you visit a congregation of our church on a Sunday and you are not a member yet and you're just sort of checking it out, or you're visiting with family or a friend, that sacrament gets passed around and you are welcome to take some. You can choose not to, but the invitation is yours, rather than some religions who you have to be only the priest. In this instance, in David's day, was just the priest, or it's just the select few that get invited up, like you've got to be very righteous, or you're not a member of this church or this congregation, we don't know you can't have sacrament. Now that's not a lot of churches. Most of them are very welcoming and quite happy to have you there and share with you. So don't think I'm picking on anyone, but there are some that say no, actually no. So he was saying there that this is for everyone. Like, and don't be so critical on the Sabbath. You've got to eat, you've got to eat. You need to do that, and you need to cook to be able to eat sometimes on the Sabbath. You can prepare it however you want to prepare it, and every family will do this differently. So, healing the man with a withered hand, though, is a statement to the Pharisees and scribes that he, Christ, held the authority, not them. Jesus' Sabbath is about our relationship with him and the restful, soul-enriching day. It's about restful, soul-enriching day. It is soul food for our soul. That's what the Sabbath is. Not a day about rules and strict obeyance. And, we've all been in those wonderful Sunday school lessons or even Relief Society lessons. Or you probably even heard church talks on it where somebody thinks they've got the Sabbath down pat and they tell you everything that they do on the Sabbath for their family. And you know what? That's nice for your family. But each family is different. Each family has different needs. I don't need to entertain children on a Sunday, the Sabbath day, because I don't have any at home. But you might. And you might need to find activities that work for them. And sometimes that means going outside and running off some steam because that's what that child needs. And other times it's finding a good book to read. Does it have to be a church one? No, not necessarily. Just a good book. There's ways to meditate and ground yourself on the Sabbath that will uniquely fit you and not anyone else. And there's times where, I prefer not to travel on the Sabbath because that means I'm using a lot of people's services and requiring them to work. But then sometimes it's the right thing to do. And I pray about that at the time and this is the day that is available for travel because I need to get to this destination because you want me to go and be there. I need to travel on the Sabbath to do so. And I feel okay about that. Usually I wouldn't do that. That's my personal thing. But that's what it is. It's our relationship with Christ, and it's Sabbath by relationship, not Sabbath by rules. And so if somebody's saying to you all these rules are there, and yeah, there are some rules that are there, and do occasionally we break them, like we're not supposed to go to the shops or do shopping on a Sunday, and yet if I'm traveling, I'm probably going to have to buy food somewhere, or at least maybe stop for petrol. I'm going to have to do that, but that's okay. Because it's not all the time. This is Sabbath by relationship, not Sabbath by rules. And you will know, if you have this relationship and you endeavor to have this relationship with Christ where you are yoked to him, where you know him by his actions, as we've already talked about, then you will know what is okay to do and what is not okay to do. It will fit for you and your family and your circumstance at the time. President Nelson is a big advocate of this. Now, he said, when I had to make a decision whether or not an activity was appropriate for the Sabbath, I simply asked myself, what sign do I want to give to God? That question made my choices about the Sabbath day crystal clear. And I think that says it all. So what sign do you want to give to God on whatever you're doing? Now, for some of us, that means a Sunday afternoon nap because that's what we need and that's showing that we're restful, we're having a respectful thing. For some of us, it's not watching TV. That's not a thing in our house because we don't watch anything that we wouldn't watch any other day of the week anyway. And we've done other Sabbath day activities, we're not doing those instead of watching TV. So there's those kind of things. We'll play card games, and some people don't even do that. Some people like to stay in their church clothes to remind them that it's the Sabbath. It helps them keep in that Sabbath mentality. Personally, I like to come home from church and get into my pajamas or something really comfy because it reminds me then that I'm in a mode of rest rather than having to go out again. So it's for each person, it will be individual. That's what he's teaching here, is that it's Sabbath by relationship, not Sabbath by rule. Because that's what the Pharisees were hung up on, Sabbath by rule, and so ready to judge others for not keeping those rules when they didn't even have a relationship with Christ. So really have a look at that and sort of feel like you have a discussion with your family, or even if you're by yourself. What are you doing on the Sabbath? Is it indicating to God what you want it to? That sign that you're doing by those actions or those activities that you're doing on a Sabbath, is that really showing Christ? Because if you can't make it to church, what are you doing instead? If you can't do the things that you'd like to do because you're sick, what are you doing instead? What is that sign that you want to give? And you make that decision based on your relationship with Christ and how it fits for you, your family, your husband and wife coupling, or whatever you've got going on there with the family. you will know. Simple as that. So yeah, Sabbath by relationship instead of Sabbath by rule. Very cool teaching. So hang around. We're going to go over to Luke, I believe. Let me see. Yes, we are. We're going over to Luke 11. I'll see you there.